My name is Ashley Reynolds, and I'm 29 years old. After building a successful finance career in New York City, I thought I'd finally escaped the shadow of my family's betrayal. Until last month, when my parents demanded $500,000 for their retirement fund after forcing me to drop out of Yale 8 years ago to pay for my brother's Stanford education. The audacity of their request reopened wounds I thought had healed. But this time, I wasn't that helpless sophomore anymore. Before I dive into this heartbreaking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss stories about standing up for yourself. I grew up in Blue Springs, Nebraska, a town so small that the welcome sign and the farewell sign stood on the same post. My parents, Linda and Michael Reynolds, were hardworking middle-class people. Dad worked as an engineer at the local manufacturing plant, and Mom was an administrative assistant at the high school. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. At least, that's what I believed growing up. My brother Ryan was born when I was 3. From my earliest memories, there was always something different about how my parents treated us. When Ryan brought home B's and C's, there would be celebratory ice cream. When I brought home straight A's, it was expected just a quick, good job, before the conversation shifted to Ryan's latest baseball game or science project. Girls don't need education as much as boys do, my mother would often say when I expressed interest in advanced classes. Ryan will need to support a family someday. Meanwhile, I was subtly being groomed to prioritize finding a husband over building a career. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, I threw myself into academics with a vengeance. By the time I reached high school, the disparity was impossible to ignore. Ryan struggled with basic algebra while I was taking AP calculus. He needed tutoring to maintain C averages, while I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. I don't say this to disparage my brother. He had other talents and was charming and athletic in ways I wasn't. But the academic sphere was where I excelled, and rather than celebrate this, my parents seemed almost resentful of it. Senior year, I was named valedictorian. I scored in the 99th percentile on my SATs. I won the state science competition with a project on sustainable energy solutions. Each achievement was met with the same tepid response from my parents. "That's nice, honey. Did you see that Ryan made the varsity baseball team?" When college application season arrived, I knew better than to expect much support. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Walters, became my greatest ally. She was the one who encouraged me to aim high. Harvard, Princeton, Yale. "With your scores and achievements," she told me, "you could go anywhere." I applied to 12 schools in secret, using money I'd saved from my part-time job at the local library to pay the application fee. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I could barely contain my excitement. 7 Ivy League acceptances, including my dream school, Yale. The scholarship offers were generous but not complete. Yale offered to cover 75% of my costs, an incredible amount, but still leaving about $15,000 per year that would need to come from somewhere else. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my parents, their reaction was predictably underwhelming. "Yale, in Connecticut? That's so far away, Ashley. And so expensive," my mother said, frowning at the acceptance letter as if it were a bill rather than an achievement. "But they're offering me a huge scholarship," I argued. "I just need help with the rest." After days of tense discussions and my father crunching numbers late into the night, they reluctantly agreed. "We'll make it work," Dad said, though there was no congratulatory dinner, no proud phone calls to relatives, just a resigned acceptance that their daughter was being difficult by insisting on an education they deemed unnecessary. In August 2012, I arrived at Yale's campus with 2 suitcases and a heart full of dreams. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued intellect and ambition regardless of gender. My roommate, Kate, became the sister I'd never had, encouraging, supportive, excited by my successes. My professors challenged and nurtured my mind in ways I'd always craved. That first year was transformative. I declared a major in economics with a minor in mathematics. I joined the Women in Business Club and the Investment Banking Society. I made the dean's list both semesters. During winter break, when I returned to Nebraska, I was a different person, confident, articulate, filled with stories about debates and lectures and the fascinating people I'd met. My parents listened with polite disinterest. Ryan, then a high school junior, seemed genuinely happy for me, the one bright spot in an otherwise disappointing homecoming. By sophomore year, I had secured a prestigious summer internship at Goldman Sachs. My academic advisor suggested I consider adding a second major given my exceptional performance. I was flourishing, becoming the person I was meant to be, free from the constrained expectations that had defined my childhood. Then came the phone call that would alter the course of my life. It was a Tuesday evening in February of my sophomore year. I was in the library studying for a macroeconomics exam when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I stepped outside to take the call, shivering in the New Haven winter. "Ashley? Are you sitting down? We have some news," my mother said, her voice carrying an unusual excitement. My mind raced to all the possibilities. Someone was ill, someone was getting married, someone had died. Ryan got accepted to Stanford for engineering. Isn't that wonderful? I felt a genuine surge of happiness for my brother. "That's amazing, Mom. Stanford is incredible. Tell him congratulations from me." "Well, that's why we're calling," my father's voice cut in. I realized I was on speakerphone. "We need to talk about finances." The conversation that followed remains seared into my memory, each word a burn mark on my heart. "The thing is, Ashley," my father continued, his voice taking on the formal tone he used when discussing serious matters, "Stanford doesn't offer the kind of scholarships Yale does. And it's even more expensive." "Okay," I said slowly, not yet understanding where this was heading. "We've been struggling more than we let on," my mother added. "Your father's company has been making cuts, and the mortgage on the house is higher than we anticipated when we refinanced." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. "What we're trying to say," my father finally continued, "is that we can't afford to send both you and Ryan to expensive schools." The implication hung in the air for a moment before my mother made it explicit. "We need you to come home, Ashley. We can't pay for Yale anymore." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What? But I'm halfway through sophomore year. I have the internship lined up. My grades are perfect." "Ryan is the boy," my mother said, as if this explained everything. "He needs to support a family someday. Engineering at Stanford, that's a real investment in his future." The gender discrimination that had colored my entire childhood was now being used to dismantle my future. I felt sick. "But what about my future?" I asked, my voice small and broken. "You're smart, Ashley. You can finish at the state university. Or maybe take some time off, find a nice young man, settle down." Tears streamed down my face as I tried to process what was happening. There has to be another way. I could take out loans. I could apply for more scholarships. I could work part-time. Each suggestion was shot down. Loans would be too burdensome. Additional scholarships were unlikely mid-year. A part-time job wouldn't come close to covering the cost. "We've already decided," my father said firmly. "We're sorry, but Ryan needs this opportunity." As the conversation continued, a devastating realization dawned on me. This wasn't a new decision. They had known about their financial situation all along. They had let me go to Yale knowing they might pull me out if Ryan got into a good school. I had never been the priority. I had always been the contingency plan. For hours after that call, I sat on a bench in the freezing cold, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My options were brutally limited. I could defy my parents and try to find a way to stay at Yale, potentially losing my family in the process. Or I could sacrifice my dreams to preserve those relationships, damaged as they now were. The next day, I met with the financial aid office, the dean of students, and anyone else who might offer a solution. But with the semester already underway and my family unwilling to fill out the necessary paperwork for independent student status, my options were non-existent. 1 week later, I stood in my half-empty dorm room, surrounded by packed boxes. Tate hugged me fiercely, promising to stay in touch, both of us knowing that life had a way of pulling people in different directions. "This isn't fair," she kept saying. "This isn't right." She was correct on both counts. But fairness and rightness had little currency in my family dynamic. As I took one last look at the Gothic architecture of the campus that had briefly been my home, I felt a numbness that would take years to thaw. Returning to Blue Springs felt like stepping back in time. My childhood bedroom remained unchanged, debate trophies gathering dust, honor roll certificates pinned to a corkboard, dreams suspended in amber. But I was different. Shattered, yes, but somewhere beneath the pain lay a steely determination I hadn't known I possessed. The first few weeks were a blur of depression. I barely left my room, ignoring my parents' attempts at conversation and Ryan's awkward expressions of gratitude. When I finally emerged, it was with a plan. I took a job as a barista at the local coffee shop, and another as a night clerk at a hotel. Between the two, I saved every penny that didn't go toward helping with household expenses, my parents' tacit requirement for letting me continue living at home. 3 months after leaving Yale, I quietly enrolled in courses at Blue River Community College. My parents noticed my absence but seemed relieved that I was getting on with life, rather than moping around. Little did they know that I was taking a full course load in business and finance, maintaining my academic edge even as I worked 60 hours a week. Those 2 years were the hardest of my life. I slept 4 hours a night. I studied during breaks at work, between shifts, and into the early morning hours. I lost weight. I lost friends. I almost lost myself. But I never lost sight of my goal: financial independence, a return to the trajectory I had been forced to abandon. By the time I had earned my associate's degree with perfect grades, I had also saved enough to move out of my parents' house and into a tiny apartment of my own. The distance, both physical and emotional, was necessary for my survival. With my stellar community college record, I transferred to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln as a junior. Though it wasn't Yale, it had a respectable business program, and more importantly, I could afford it through a combination of scholarships, my savings, and a manageable amount of student loans. During those years, my relationship with my family grew increasingly strained. I came home for major holidays, enduring painful dinners where my parents would extol Ryan's accomplishments at Stanford while barely acknowledging my own academic success. Ryan himself seemed uncomfortable with the disparity in treatment, occasionally trying to redirect conversations to my achievements, only to be swiftly redirected by our parents. In my senior year at Nebraska, I applied to finance positions exclusively in New York, as far from Nebraska as I could reasonably go while still pursuing my career goals. When I received an offer from a boutique investment firm, I accepted immediately, despite the entry-level salary that would barely cover rent in one of the world's most expensive cities. I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Nebraska in May 2017. My parents attended the ceremony, clapping politely when my name was called. They declined my invitation to dinner afterward, citing the long drive back to Blue Springs. I ate alone at a restaurant near campus, toasting myself with a glass of cheap champagne. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to New York with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases, the same ones I had taken to Yale 5 years earlier. The early years in New York were grueling. The finance industry demanded 80-hour work weeks, laser-sharp attention to detail, and a thick skin to withstand the ruthlessly competitive environment. My tiny apartment in Washington Heights was shared with 2 roommates I rarely saw due to our opposite schedules. I lived on ramen and coffee, pouring every ounce of energy into proving myself at work. But unlike the grinding hopelessness of those first months after leaving Yale, this struggle had purpose. Each exhausting day was a step toward rebuilding what had been taken from me. By my second year at the firm, I had caught the attention of senior management. My analytical skills, work ethic, and ability to spot market trends set me apart from my peers. I was assigned to increasingly important clients and given greater responsibilities. At 25, I was promoted to analyst. At 27, to senior analyst. My salary increased accordingly, allowing me to move into my own apartment in Brooklyn. I built a chosen family of friends, other transplants to the city who understood what it meant to reinvent yourself far from home. During these years, my contact with my family dwindled to occasional phone calls and even less frequent visits. My parents seemed baffled by my career, unable to comprehend the world of hedge funds and investment portfolios I now inhabited. Ryan graduated from Stanford and immediately secured a high-paying position at a tech company in San Francisco. My parents spoke of him with reverential pride, regularly updating me on his promotions, his new car, his beautiful apartment overlooking the bay. "You should see the place Ryan bought," my mother would gush during our monthly calls. 2 bedrooms, all modern appliances, and the view is just spectacular. "Your father and I helped with the down payment, of course. It was a stretch, but we wanted him to have a good start." Each such comment was a twist of the knife, a reminder that the financial hardship that had ended my Yale career had somehow not prevented them from funding Ryan's post-college lifestyle. I swallowed the bitterness, responding with noncommittal murmurs before changing the subject. By 29, I had built a substantial investment portfolio of my own, managing not only my firm's clients' assets but growing my personal wealth through careful, strategic investments. The scared, heartbroken girl who had packed up her Yale dorm room was now a confident, financially secure woman. I had done it entirely on my own, a fact that gave me both pride and a lingering sense of injustice. I had largely made peace with my past, or so I thought, until the invitation arrived for Ryan's engagement party back in Nebraska. After 8 years of minimal contact with my family, I was about to be thrust back into the dynamic I had worked so hard to escape. Ryan's engagement party was held at an upscale country club outside Omaha, a far cry from the modest gatherings of my childhood. I flew in from New York the morning of the event, planning to leave the following day. In and out, minimal emotional damage, that was the plan. The cocktail hour was awkward, filled with relatives I barely recognized and their inevitable question. New York, huh? We don't see much of you anymore. Finance, how interesting. Your brother's in tech, right? Doing so well for himself. No husband yet, no kids. Well, there's still time, I suppose. I smiled through gritted teeth, nursed a single glass of wine, and counted the minutes until I could politely leave. At dinner, I was seated at the family table with my parents, Ryan, his fiancée Jessica, and her parents. The conversation revolved around the couple's plans: their upcoming wedding in Napa Valley, the honeymoon in Bali, the house they were looking to buy in San Francisco's Marina District. We've been looking at places around $3 million, Ryan mentioned casually, as if discussing the weather. The market's competitive, but Dad's been helping us navigate the financing option. I nearly choked on my water. $3 million, and my father was helping with financing. The same father who couldn't find $15,000 a year to keep me at Yale. After dinner, as guests mingled and danced, my mother pulled me aside. Your father and I would like to speak with you privately, she said, her tone eerily similar to that fateful phone call years ago. In the library room down the hall. The country club's library was all leather and mahogany, reminiscent of the Yale buildings I had left behind. My father was already there, standing by a window, looking older than I remembered. Ashley, he began without preamble, we need to discuss something important. My mother closed the door behind us. It's about our retirement, she added. What followed was so surreal that I wondered momentarily if I was dreaming. The thing is, my father continued, supporting Ryan through Stanford and helping him get established afterward has depleted our savings more than we anticipated. We're concerned about our retirement years. I nodded slowly, not yet seeing where this was heading. You've done very well for yourself in New York, my mother said. Your father and I are proud, even if we don't always understand exactly what you do. It was the closest thing to praise I'd heard from them in years, and immediately I was suspicious. We've been thinking, my father resumed, clearing his throat, that since you're in such a strong financial position now, you might consider helping us rebuild our retirement fund. Helping how? I asked, though a sickening realization was already dawning. We've calculated that we need about $500,000 to feel secure, my mother said, as casually as if asking to borrow a cup of sugar. Given your career in finance, that should be manageable. The audacity left me momentarily speechless. $500,000. More than the cost of the Yale education they had denied me. Let me get this straight, I finally said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. You want me to give you $500,000 because you spent your retirement savings on Ryan? It's not just about Ryan, my father protested. But yes, supporting him through school and afterward did impact our savings significantly. And you think I owe you this? Why exactly? Because your family, my mother said simply. And because, frankly, you didn't cost us as much. You had your scholarship at Yale, and then you left. You've been independent since. Ryan needed more support. The twisted logic was breathtaking. I hadn't cost them as much because they had forced me to drop out, to fend for myself, to rebuild my life from scratch. And now that was being used as justification for this outrageous demand. Where is Ryan in all this? I asked. Is he contributing to this retirement fund too? My parents exchanged glances. Ryan has his own expenses, my mother said defensively. The wedding, the house. He'll help when he can, but right now you're in a better position to assist. The door opened and Ryan himself entered, looking uncomfortable. Mom texted me to come in, he explained. What's going on? They want me to give them $500,000 for their retirement, I said bluntly. Apparently because I didn't cost them enough when they forced me to drop out of Yale. Ryan's face went pale. Wait, what? They forced you to drop out? The realization that Ryan didn't know the full story hit me like a physical blow. All these years, I had assumed he was complicit, that he had understood the sacrifice I had been forced to make. But the genuine shock on his face told a different story. They didn't tell you, I asked. They pulled me out of Yale sophomore year because they said they couldn't afford to send us both to expensive schools. They chose your education over mine. Ryan turned to our parents, his expression stricken. Is this true? You told me she left Yale because she was homesick and decided it wasn't for her. The silence from my parents was confirmation enough. I left the room, then the country club, then took an Uber straight to my hotel. In my room, I finally allowed the tears to come, not just for the current betrayal, but for all the years of sacrifice and struggle, for the Yale degree I never got to complete, for the family that had never valued me as they should have. I called Kate, my old Yale roommate and still my closest friend despite the geographical distance between us. Through tears, I recounted the events of the evening. They want what? She exclaimed. After everything they put you through, Ashley, please tell me you're not considering it. I don't know what to do, I admitted. They're still my parents, and clearly they're in financial trouble if they're asking me for money. Their financial trouble is of their own making, Kate said firmly. They chose to prioritize Ryan at every turn. They chose to help him buy property in one of the most expensive cities in America. These were choices, Ash, choices that repeatedly excluded you. As we talked into the early hours of the morning, a decision crystallized in my mind. This was my moment to finally stand up for myself, to refuse to be the daughter who sacrificed everything while receiving nothing in return. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms. Back in New York, I threw myself into work, using the familiar rhythm of spreadsheets and market analyses to process the tumultuous emotions from the engagement party. But the question remained, how to respond to my parents' outrageous demand. My first instinct was simply to refuse and cut ties completely. But something held me back, not sentimentality, but a deeper need for acknowledgement. After all these years, I wanted them to truly see what they had done. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Chen, the therapist I had been seeing intermittently since my difficult early days in New York. They're asking for $500,000, she repeated after I explained the situation. And they don't see any issue with this request. They seem to think it's perfectly reasonable, I confirm, because I didn't cost them as much as Ryan did. Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, but I could sense her incredulity. How does that make you feel, Ashley? Angry. Hurt. Vindicated. In a way, it confirms that everything I've felt about the disparity in how they treated us was real. But mostly, I feel like I need to respond in a way that finally makes them understand what they did. Over the next 2 sessions, we explored my options. Dr. Chen helped me see that my parents' request came from a place of entitled expectation that had characterized our entire relationship. They had always expected me to accommodate, to sacrifice, to put my needs last. This was simply the most extreme manifestation of that pattern. Whatever you decide, she advised, make sure it's a decision you can live with long-term. Don't react out of immediate anger or hurt, even though those feelings are completely valid. With that guidance in mind, I embarked on a research project of sorts. I still had access to my parents' email through an old shared family account they had never bothered to remove me from. I wasn't proud of using it, but I needed information. What I discovered confirmed my worst suspicions and then some. Email receipts for $45,000 Audi they had purchased for Ryan the same month I left Yale. Confirmation of payments for vacations to Hawaii, Europe, and the Caribbean during his Stanford years. Most damning of all, a wire transfer of $100,000 toward the down payment on his San Francisco home just last. I created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every expense they had covered for Ryan since 2013, the year I left Yale. Then I calculated exactly what my remaining Yale education would have cost: tuition, room, board, books, everything. The disparity was staggering. They had spent over $350,000 on Ryan beyond his Stanford education, while the remaining cost of my Yale degree would have been approximately $45,000 total. Next, I researched my parents' financial situation more thoroughly. Property records showed their house was nearly paid off and worth considerably more than they had paid for it. My father's retirement account statements, again accessible through that shared email, showed a healthy balance, not enough to maintain their current lifestyle indefinitely, but certainly not the dire situation they had implied. I compiled all this information into a comprehensive financial analysis, the kind I would prepare for a high-value client at my firm. Cold, hard facts and figures that told the story of years of financial favoritism. As I worked on this document during evenings and weekends, I consulted with Mark Jefferson, a senior partner at my firm who had become something of a mentor to me. Without revealing all the personal details, I explained the general situation. Family and money is always complicated, he said after reviewing my analysis. But these numbers tell a clear story of inequity. If this were a business partnership, there would be grounds for legal action. It's not about the money, I told him. I don't need or want anything from them, but I need them to see what they did. Mark nodded thoughtfully. Then present it exactly as you would to a client who's been making poor financial decisions. No emotion, just facts. Make it impossible to argue with your conclusion. The final document was 23 pages long, complete with charts, graphs, and projections. It laid out in irrefutable detail the financial choices my parents had made over the years and their impact on both Ryan and me. The last page contained a simple statement. Based on the preceding analysis, I will not be contributing to your retirement fund now or in the future. I had it professionally printed and bound, then booked a flight to Nebraska. This confrontation needed to happen in person. As I packed for the trip, I realized that no matter how my parents responded, this would be a turning point. Either they would finally acknowledge the injustice of their actions, or I would have to accept that they never would and adjust my relationship with them accordingly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Kate asked during our nightly phone call. "You don't owe them an explanation. You could just say no and be done with it." "I'm sure," I replied. "This isn't just about their demand for money. It's about everything that led to this point. I need closure one way or another." The night before my flight, I received an unexpected text from Ryan. "Can we talk before you see Mom and Dad? There's something you should know." I called him immediately, curious about what new information he might have. "I've been doing some thinking since the engagement party," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "And I've been asking questions. Did you know they took out a home equity loan to help me with the down payment on my house?" "Yes," I replied. "I did some research. It was $100,000. There was a pause. "Jesus, I had no idea it was that much. They told me it was a little help." "Ashley, I swear I didn't know about Yale. All these years, I thought you left because you wanted to. If I had known they pulled you out to pay for Stanford, I never would have accepted." I believed him. Whatever issues I had with my brother, outright malice had never been one of them. He had been as manipulated by our parents as I had been, just in a different way. "I'll be there tomorrow," I told him. "We can talk more then." As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time, I wasn't going to Nebraska to accommodate or appease. I was going to stand up for myself, with truth as my weapon and years of hard-won independence as my shield. The familiar drive from the Omaha airport to Blue Springs felt surreal, as if I were moving through a memory rather than reality. The rental car's GPS directed me through the unchanged streets of my hometown, past the high school where my mother had worked, the library where I'd spent countless hours escaping into books, and finally to the modest two-story house where I'd grown up. My parents' surprised expressions when they opened the door confirmed that they hadn't expected this visit. I hadn't warned them I was coming, a tactical decision to prevent them from preparing a defense. "Ashley, what are you doing here?" my mother exclaimed, automatically moving in for a hug that I sidestepped. "We need to talk," I said simply, walking past her into the living room where my father sat in his usual recliner, watching baseball. "Ashley," he said, muting the TV, "this is unexpected. I'm here to discuss your request for $500,000, I stated, my voice steady and professional. I placed my leather portfolio on the coffee table between us. "I've prepared a response." My mother hurried in from the entryway. "Well, we certainly didn't expect you to fly all the way out here. A phone call would have sufficed. This isn't a conversation I wanted to have over the phone." I sat on the edge of the sofa, maintaining the formal posture I used in business meetings. "Before we begin, I want to be clear. This discussion is about facts and figures, not emotions. I've done a comprehensive financial analysis that I'd like to walk you." My parents exchanged confused glances as I opened the portfolio and removed the bound document. "This is an analysis of your financial decisions regarding Ryan and me over the past 8 years, I explained, handing them each a copy. "Page 3 shows the remaining cost of my Yale education at the time you forced me to leave, approximately $45,000 total for the remaining 2.5 years, given my scholarship." "Now, Ashley," my father began, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Please let me finish. Page 5 itemizes the expenses you covered for Ryan beyond his Stanford tuition during the same period, including a $45,000 Audi purchase the month I left Yale, vacations totaling $62,000, and the $100,000 down payment on his San Francisco home. My mother's face flushed. How did you get this information? That's not relevant to the discussion, I replied coolly. What's relevant is that the total comes to over $350,000 in discretionary spending on Ryan beyond his education costs nearly 8 times what it would have cost to keep me at Yale. These were gifts, my father protested. Family helps family. Exactly, I agreed. Family helps family. So let's discuss page 8, which analyzes your current financial situation. Your house is nearly paid off and worth approximately $425,000 in today's market. Dad's 401k has a current balance of $780,000. You have approximately $95,000 in liquid savings across 3 accounts. This hardly constitutes a retirement crisis. My mother's expression hardened. You had no right to investigate our finances. Perhaps not. But you had no right to demand $500,000 from me on the basis of false premises, I countered. Page 12 compares what you spent on my education versus Ryan's, including the post-college support you provided him. The disparity is approximately $600,000 in his favor. This is ridiculous, my father said, throwing the document onto the coffee table. We raised you, clothed you, fed you for 18 years. We don't owe you an accounting of how we spend our money. You're right, I agreed. You don't, just as I don't owe you an explanation for how I spend mine. But when you demand $500,000 from me because, in your words, I didn't cost as much, you make it relevant. The front door opened and Ryan walked in. His timing was either terrible or perfect, depending on one's perspective. What's going on? He asked, taking in the tense scene. Your sister is accusing us of favoritism, my mother said sharply. She's created this spreadsheet to prove we love you more or some such nonsense. It's not about love, I clarified, maintaining my composure. It's about financial decisions and their consequences. It's about pulling me out of Yale while spending hundreds of thousands on Ryan's comfort and convenience. And now, it's about the audacity of asking me for $500,000 because of a financial shortfall of your own creation. Ryan picked up one of the discarded reports and began flipping through it. His face grew increasingly troubled. Mom, Dad, is this all true? The Audi was $45,000, and you gave me $100,000 for the house. He looked up, genuinely shocked. You told me it was $20,000. We wanted to help you get established, my father said defensively. There's nothing wrong with parents helping their child. Unless that child is me, I interjected, in which case I get pulled out of Yale and told to fend for myself. You've done very well for yourself, my mother said dismissively. Clearly you didn't need Yale to succeed. That's not the point, Ryan said, surprising me by coming to my defense. The point is that you lied to both of us. You told me Ashley left Yale voluntarily. You told me the help with my house was minimal. You've been playing us against each other for years. My parents looked genuinely taken aback by Ryan's reaction. They had clearly expected him to take their side. We did what we thought was best, my father insisted. We had limited resources and had to make choices. Your choices are laid out in black and white in that report, I said, and they consistently prioritized Ryan's comfort over my education and future. That was your right as parents. But now I'm making my choice. I will not be giving you $500,000 or any other amount for your retirement. So that's it, my mother asked, her voice rising. After everything we've done for you, you're just going to refuse to help us? Everything you've done for me, I repeated, finally allowing some emotion to color my voice. Did you read the report? You actively hindered me. I succeeded despite your choices, not because of them. If you walk away from this family obligation, don't expect us to be there for you in the future, my father threatened. When were you ever there for me in the past? I asked quietly. When I called crying from Nebraska because I had to drop out of my dream school. When I worked 60-hour weeks while putting myself through community college. When I graduated with honors from the University of Nebraska with no family dinner to celebrate. The room fell silent. For perhaps the first time, my words seemed to land. I've spent years trying to understand why my own parents would sabotage my education while lavishing support on my brother, I continued. The only conclusion I can draw is that you never valued me or my potential as much as you valued his. That's your loss. Because I've built a life and a career I'm proud of, and I did it entirely without your support. I stood up, gathering my portfolio. I'll be reducing contact with you moving forward. Not out of anger or revenge, but as a boundary I need for my own well-being. You've shown me repeatedly that you don't have my best interests at heart, and I can no longer pretend otherwise. You're disowning us over money, my mother asked incredulously. No, Mom, I'm creating distance because you've consistently shown that you don't value me as much as you value Ryan. The money is just the most recent and egregious example. As I headed for the door, my father called after me. If you leave like this, don't expect to be welcome back. I turned to face him one last time. I stopped expecting anything from you the day you made me leave Yale. That's been the most valuable lesson you ever taught me, to rely only on myself. Outside, the Nebraska spring air felt clean and fresh compared to the stifling atmosphere of the house. As I walked to my rental car, I heard footsteps behind me. Ashley, wait, Ryan called, jotting to catch up. I'm so sorry, I had no idea about any of this. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. You were as much a pawn in their game as I was, just on the receiving end of the benefits rather than the sacrifices. I feel terrible, he said, running a hand through his hair. All these years, enjoying the perks while you were struggling. If I had known. What would you have done differently? I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. He considered this. I would have refused Stanford. Or at minimum refused all the extras, the car, the trips, the house money. It wasn't fair, Ashley. None of it was fair. No, it wasn't, I agreed, but it's not your fault. You didn't make their decisions. What happens now? He asked. Between us, I mean, I don't want to lose my sister. Despite everything, I felt a surge of warmth toward him. Ryan hadn't created this situation, and his shock seemed genuine. I'd like to try having a relationship with you separate from them, I said cautiously. One based on honesty and equality. But it will take time. There's a lot of history to work through. He nodded solemnly. I'd like that too, and Jessica would love to actually get to know you, not just the version of you our parents have presented. We exchanged a somewhat awkward hug before I got into my car. As I drove away, I watched him standing in the driveway, in my rearview mirror, the brother I had resented for years without realizing he too had been manipulated, just in a different way. The weight I had carried for so long felt lighter somehow. Not gone completely, but transformed. I had spoken my truth. I had set my boundary. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same resilience that had carried me from that devastating phone call in my Yale dorm room to the successful, independent woman I had become. The flight back to New York was turbulent, a fitting metaphor for the emotional storm I had just weathered. But as the plane broke through the clouds into clear sky, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. For the first time since that fateful day at Yale, I had taken control of the narrative. I had refused to be the sacrificial daughter anymore. Back in my Brooklyn apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Kate to debrief. I'm so proud of you, she said after I recounted the confrontation. How do you feel? Lighter, I admitted. Like I've put down a burden I didn't even realize I was still carrying. But also sad. I think part of me always hoped that someday they would acknowledge what they did and apologize. They might still in time, Kate suggested. You've given them a lot to think about. I wasn't counting on it, but I appreciated her optimism. The next few months were devoted to healing. I increased my sessions with Dr. Chen, working through the complex emotions stirred up by the confrontation. I established clearer boundaries in other relationships, no longer defaulting to self-sacrifice as I had been conditioned to do. I even started dating again after a long hiatus, now more confident in my ability to recognize and avoid unhealthy dynamics. Ryan and I began cautiously rebuilding our relationship through occasional phone calls. He was making his own journey toward understanding our family's dysfunction and his unwitting role in it. He postponed his wedding, recognizing that he needed to establish healthier patterns before starting his own family. Jessica and I are in couples counseling, he told me during one call. I don't want to repeat our parents' patterns. I don't want any future children of mine to feel like one is valued over the other. It was the most insightful thing I'd ever heard him say. 3 months after the confrontation, I was promoted to partner at my firm, the youngest in its history. The promotion came with a substantial raise and increased responsibilities managing our highest-value clients. The scared girl who had once worked as a barista and hotel clerk to put herself through community college was now helping to shape investment strategies for Fortune 500 companies. On the day of the promotion, I received an unexpected email from Ryan with the subject line, "Proud of you." Attached was a photo of us as children, maybe 7 and 4 years old, building a sandcastle together at some forgotten beach vacation. The message simply read, "You deserve better. I'm trying to be better. Congratulations on the partnership. No one earned it more than you." It was the acknowledgement I had always wanted from my family, coming from the one member who seemed capable of growth. My parents remained silent. I had sent them a brief email after the confrontation, reiterating my need for distance and my openness to reconciliation if they ever chose to acknowledge the harm they had caused. The lack of response spoke volumes. 6 months later, I received a call from Yale's alumni office. They were organizing a series of talks called Pathways and Detours, Alumni Success Stories Beyond the Traditional Route, and someone had recommended me as a speaker. "We understand you left Yale during your sophomore year, but have gone on to remarkable success in finance," the alumni coordinator explained. "We'd love for you to share your journey with current students, especially those facing their own challenges." The irony wasn't lost on me being invited back to the institution I had been forced to leave. But after some reflection, I accepted. Perhaps my story could help other students facing their own seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Returning to Yale's campus was surreal. The Gothic architecture, the elegant courtyards, the buzz of brilliant minds, it all felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, like revisiting a beloved childhood home now occupied by strangers. Kate flew in from Chicago, where she now worked as a corporate attorney, to support me. We walked the campus together the day before my talk, retracing the paths we had once taken as roommates. "Remember that awful party at Sigma Chi?" she laughed as we passed the fraternity row. "Where that guy tried to explain economics to you after you just aced Prescott's midterm. And you spilled your drink on him accidentally on purpose," I finished, grinning at the memory. These moments of shared history were precious to me, connections to the life I had briefly touched before it was taken away. My talk the next day was held in a packed lecture hall. I spoke candidly about my experience, the forced departure from Yale, the years of struggle, the professional success I had ultimately achieved, and most importantly, the lessons I had learned about resilience, self-worth, and defining success on my own terms. "Education is invaluable," I told the rapt audience. "But what you do with the education you have, whether it's from Yale or a community college in Nebraska, matters more than where your diploma comes from. Your worth is not determined by the name on your degree." During the Q&A session afterward, a young woman raised her hand. "I'm on scholarship too," she said, "and my family is pressuring me to leave and get a job to help support my younger siblings. I don't want to sound selfish, but I've worked so hard to get here." Her situation hit so close to home that I had to take a moment before responding. "It's not selfish to value your education and your future," I finally said. "Family dynamics are complex, and I can't tell you what choice to make. But I can tell you that whatever you decide, don't let anyone convince you that your dreams and ambitions matter less than someone else's. And know that even if the path forward isn't what you imagine, there are always alternate routes to your goals if you're persistent enough." After the talk, several students lingered to speak with me one-on-one. Among them was a young woman from Nebraska named Emily, who was in her first year on a scholarship similar to what I had once had. "I'm from Blue Springs too," she said shyly. "Our guidance counselor, Mrs. Walters, told me about you. She's the one who encouraged me to apply to Yale." Mrs. Walters, the counselor who had helped me aim high all those years ago, was still changing lives, still believing in the potential of small-town girls with big dreams. "Mrs. Walters is still there?" I asked, smiling at the memory of the woman who had been one of the few adults to truly support me. "She retired last year, but she mentored me throughout high school. She said you were the most brilliant student she ever worked with, and that you overcame incredible obstacles to succeed." On the flight back to New York, I found myself thinking about cycles and patterns, how they can be broken, how new ones can be created. Mrs. Walters had seen something in me and helped me reach for Yale. Not Emily was there because of Mrs. Walters' continued belief in the potential of girls from our hometown. And I had the opportunity to mentor young women like Emily to help them navigate their own obstacles. The week after returning from Yale, I established a scholarship fund for young women in financial need, specifically targeting those who had to leave college due to family obligations or financial hardship. The Ashley Reynolds Second Chance Scholarship would provide funding for women to return to school and complete their degrees, no matter how long they had been away from academia. I seeded the fund with $500,000, the exact amount my parents had demanded from me. It felt like perfect poetic justice, transforming their selfish request into an opportunity for others who had faced similar challenges. As the fund grew through additional donations from colleagues and eventually a matching grant from my firm, I began to see that my painful experience had created a unique capacity for empathy and a specific avenue for impact that I might not otherwise have developed. The following spring, I received an email that made my heart stop momentarily. The subject line read, "We're sorry, Mom and Dad." The message was brief but profound. "Ashley, we've spent months reflecting on everything you said during your visit. It's taken us this long to find the courage to write to you because the truth is, you were right about everything. We treated you unfairly. We prioritized Ryan's future over yours. We failed you as parents, and no explanation or excuse can change that. We recently saw an article about your scholarship foundation. Even after everything we did, you're using your success to help others. That speaks to a strength of character that we can't take any credit for. We don't expect forgiveness, and we understand if you need to maintain distance from us. But we wanted you to know that we recognize the harm we caused, and we are deeply, profoundly sorry. With love and regret, Mom and Dad." I read the email several times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't a magic solution to years of hurt, but it was an acknowledgement the thing I had wanted most and expected least. My response was cautious but open. "Thank you for this. It means more than you know. I'm not ready for regular contact yet, but I'm open to small steps forward if you're willing to continue the hard work of honest communication. Healing would take time, and our relationship would never be what it might have been in some alternate reality where they had supported both their children equally. But perhaps we could build something new, something based on truth rather than expectations and obligation." In the meantime, I had built a life I was proud of, a chosen family of friends who valued me completely, professional success beyond what I had dreamed possible when I left Yale, and now a way to help others facing similar challenges. The scholarship's first recipient was a 28-year-old woman who had left Columbia University in her junior year when her mother became ill. She had spent the last 6 years working as a medical assistant while caring for her mother, putting her own dreams of becoming a doctor on hold. With the scholarship's support, she was returning to finish her degree before applying to medical school. At the small ceremony announcing the inaugural scholarship, I shared a quote that had become something of a personal mantra during my darkest times. "Your worth is not measured by others' willingness to invest in you, but by your willingness to invest in yourself." Looking out at the small gathering of friends, colleagues, and the scholarship recipient's beaming family, I felt a sense of completion. The wounded Yale sophomore had become a woman who not only survived but thrived and was now holding the door open for others following similar difficult paths. Life rarely follows the straight line we envision for ourselves. Sometimes the detours, painful as they may be, lead us to places we never would have discovered otherwise. My forced departure from Yale had been devastating, but it had forged in me a resilience and determination that defined my character and my career. It had taught me to advocate for myself, to recognize my own worth independent of others' validation, and ultimately to transform personal pain into. As I ended my speech that day, I asked the audience, "What challenges have shaped your life's path? And how might those very obstacles become the foundation for your greatest contributions?" Because sometimes our deepest wounds become our most powerful gifts to the world if we have the courage to transform. What unexpected obstacles have forced you to change course in your own life? Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations that weren't fair or right for you? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share so others who need this message can find it too. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is inherent, not determined by others' ability to see it.